They are the creditors of our banks. Mm-hmm. And the toxic assets are not really going away. They're just being reimbursed.
Yeah, and if I could interrupt you on that, we don't know where they're not going away. Yeah. There was $14 trillion worth of what assets created on the back of these subprime and other loans, and it is not clear where any of them are. Some of them, but some of them are on the Fed's book. The Fed's not talking. Banks aren't talking. It's all very sort of murky. Anyway.
So the greatest robbery in human history is that we spent all this money and we didn't get anything back, and the problems that it caused it still exist. So when I read alternative economists like Dean Baker, and there's a number of others, they seem to come up with three options. Number one, force the banks to declare Chapter 11 and reorganize. That's not going to happen. Number two, resurrect the Resolution Trust Corporation. Mm-hmm. And then the third one would be, instead of paying 100 cents on the dollar, pay 50 cents, 30 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. Get those foreign banks to return some of that funds and then get rid of the assets.
Okay. I'll answer that. I'll just take like two more and then I'll try to remember what.
If we withdraw our deposits from the banks we don't like, where would we put them? Like in an amalgamated bank, or would we have to create new banks or new kind of investment funds? Like there's a lot of ethical funds. I mean, I don't think we'd have to withdraw everything. They'd get the idea and they'd change before they went out of business.
Okay. And one more here.
Hi, thank you. This morning on Brian Lehrer, and you were great, by the way, you mentioned something about one possible remedy would have been to pay off a lot of the foreclosed houses and mortgages, and I thought that was really interesting. Could you go over that? And also, would there be some way of addressing the individual consumer, not in a horrible blaming way, who took responsibility for a loan they couldn't back as part of the pyramid? How do you deal with that? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I think actually there's a relationship between all those questions because some of the remedies for this require understanding what actually happened. And one of the things, I have a chapter in my book called It Was Never About the Little Guy. And the idea there is that there was only a certain amount of subprime loans made, 1.4 trillion. And out of that came $14 trillion worth, or 10 times worth, toxic assets and other stuff. And over that, so that it's like little pyramid 1.4, 14. Over that, still more, those were borrowed against by banks and by investment banks and hedge funds to create more sort of fictitious assets or assets that had a lot of non-transparency in them and other things. And that's why I said this morning, and I think it's one of the solutions that we should have done, and could technically still do because we are still seeing foreclosures and unemployment and all the credit problems that we've had, is actually help pay off or at least subsidize or do any sort of the same types of things with these loans that we've been doing with the banks. Yeah, it would be one thing if the door was closed and the government, as actually Hank Paulson said in beginning of 2008, said, you know, it's not the government's responsibility to bail out people who've made mistakes. It apparently was the government's responsibility to bail out very large institutions who make mistakes, who are now showing profits. So the idea was that if you're going to go that route philosophically, that you actually can help people, A, stay in their homes, and B, help at least this pyramid from toppling over while you go about kind of breaking it from the top. So that you don't have a situation where we still have people suffering, we still have a system suffering, but we have banks doing really, or some of them doing really quite well. So that was behind that. And in terms of whether we have a resolution trust corporation or anything that buys up toxic assets like we had in the S&L crisis, we kind of do, and it's kind of the Fed. The Fed has given out trillions of dollars of loans, cheap loans, in return for quasi-toxic assets. And I say quasi because I don't know what they have. They won't tell anybody. There's a lot of lawsuits floating around. There was one, actually, Bloomberg Bloomberg News had against the Fed to open their books. It was ruled that that would be the right thing to do, and then the Fed's kind of gone about sort of deflecting that, so that's going to take a while. There were hearings recently, actually last Friday, about auditing the Fed. There's a bill called H.R. 1207 that was put forth that also actually has 290 Congress people in the House who actually support the auditing of the Fed. And given all the climate of stuff that's going on right now and like public options and health care and things getting rejected, it's pretty amazing that anything that is useful is getting through somewhat through the House right now, and it is to audit the Fed because right now they have a lot of assets on their books that are not particularly valuable, but that in return have received money and capital into the banks, which is valuable because even though it is printed from nothing, it is still real and it can be used for other things. And in terms of what we do with deposits, a lot of smaller and mid-sized banks continue to fail. That's the other side of this. The FDIC just closed its 95th bank last week. I believe that after this quarter, after basically this Friday, after the 30th, whatever, Thursday or Friday, when books are closed for the quarter, there will be more bank failures at the middle and lower level. And a lot of those banks are failing merely because they can't borrow to sort of continue to do what they do, not because they got involved in the kinds of toxic assets that the big boys got involved in. And so, on the one hand, I think it's important to support those kinds of banks. On the other hand, the FDIC is currently backing up to $250,000 deposits. And I think we have to make sure, or at least make it very vocal in case this occurs, that when the FDIC continues to back deposits, whether it's at a small bank or whether it's at a larger bank, even because it is our deposits, that they don't do stupid things like think about borrowing the money from J.P. Morgan Chase, which is what they are doing now, who just got all this money to back their deposits. It's like your insurance company's paying your premiums back, and whatever it is you're paying insurance for. I had a car accident. Okay, here's your premium back, and here we'll take care of the car. Like, when does that happen? So I think we just have to sort of be vigilant on that. And I really honestly think that a lot of these congressmen and women do have a strong desire to stay in office. And sometimes that desire, it's a logical desire, I'm not going to say whether they believe they can do good or not. It's a logical desire, and the way you do that is to get yourself out there and to get people to know what you're doing, and the way to do that is to have lobby money so that you can know, so that basically you can make your message heard. But, we've got the internet, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook. I just got an account on Facebook. I don't get it, but I have an account on it. And we have ways of sort of making things public and making our opinions public and sort of rounding up votes in a different way than I think we've had in the past, and I think there is a way to combat some of that lobby money. How much time do we have? Okay. Rod says one more round. So really quick questions so we can get 4 in. And then...
Nomi, obviously you didn't go to work for Bear Stearns and Goldman Sachs not to make money. At some level you had to be motivated. I don't want to use the word greed, but you wanted to make as much as you could. Something happened to you. What happened to you? What went on in your life? So how to be more than the facts. Something happened to change you. What was it?
That is a really good question, and Brian Lair asked me that this morning in a different way, and it was a bit of a, it's kind of tough to sometimes look at yourself. And yes, I had a motivation of, I think, the first motivation was not necessarily money, it was independence. When I looked for a job in the city, Wall Street was the only place really hiring. And I kind of had a desire to do well, just an A-type personality. I think when I got in, I just wanted to do well by its standards. And its standards were money. Its standards were rising to certain levels at the different firms. And somewhere along that way, there is an intellectual some sort of positiveness about creating stuff, even though it's out of nothing. There's still some math, and I had a math degree in computer science and statistics and all these sort of quantity things, and there was this sort of stimulation there. And then somewhere along the way, I think, it just became incredibly empty. It became incredibly bull. It was not. It wasn't only not fun. It's so incredibly empty to go in and fight for a bonus, You know, I told this story in D.C., but real